My son said, "Mom, you can't survive alone. You'd burn the house down cooking fish." He laughed like it was a joke, but I felt something in me snap. This isn't just a revenge story. It's what happens when a mother gives her whole life, only to be told she no longer belongs in it. My name is Elaine Whitmore, and for 40 years, I stood behind the counter of a bait shop by the bay, selling minnows, gutting fish, and brewing strong coffee for men too tired to speak. My husband, Cal, ran the boats. I ran everything else. The money, the gear, the house, the meals. We didn't have much, but we had each other, and we built a quiet life the way ocean waves build the shore, slowly, faithfully. When Cal died, it wasn't sudden. It was slow, cruel, a stroke that took his voice first, then his strength, and then him. I buried him with a pair of his old fishing gloves in the casket and locked up the shop. I told myself it was time to rest. My son, Brian, called 3 weeks later and said, "You shouldn't be alone out there, Mom. Come stay with us. The kids will love having Grandma around." I hesitated. That little shop, our home, held every piece of my life, but I was tired. Grief makes you soft. I packed my apron, a jar of Cal's favorite pickled onions, and the recipe book I'd handwritten since I was 23. When I arrived, the house was spotless. Granite counters, white carpet, everything smelled like lavender and money. His wife, Tessa, hugged me politely and pointed to the guest room. "This is your space," she said. "Let us take care of you now." At first, I believed them. I folded laundry, I baked biscuits, I stayed quiet. I didn't want to be a burden. I told myself, this is what family does. I didn't notice the slow erasure at first. My fish recipes were too oily. My stories were too long. The grandkids barely looked up from their phones. Brian was always working. Tessa always had errands. And one day I looked around and realized nothing here had my name on it. Not the mortgage, not the dinner plans, not the future. I'd handed over my life thinking I was still needed, but all I'd really handed them was permission to forget I had one. And that was the beginning. It started with a candle. One evening, I was making pan-fried haddock, Cal's favorite. I dusted the fillets with flour and thyme, just like I always did, humming low while the oil cracked in the pan. It smelled like home to me. Tessa walked into the kitchen, pinched her nose, and without saying a word, lit one of those big lavender candles and placed it right next to the stove, just trying to keep the house fresh, she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I didn't say anything. I just turned down the heat. A few nights later, Brian made a joke at dinner. "You know, Mom, maybe we should retire the fish thing. This place smells like the docks." The kids giggled. Tessa sipped her wine. I forced a smile, but inside, I felt something cold settle in my chest. That dock smell paid for your braces, your college, your first car. That fish thing fed you when you had nothing. But I bit my tongue. What would have been the point? It didn't stop there. One morning, I was up early folding laundry, something I'd done all my life without complaint. Tessa stopped at the stairs and said softly, "You know, you really don't have to do that. You might fall. Just leave it. We'll handle it." As if I was fragile, as if I'd never climbed 3 flights of stairs carrying fish crates heavier than her yoga mat. And then, the words that changed everything. I walked past the kitchen one afternoon and heard Brian say to Tessa, "She doesn't really help around here. Honestly, she just gets in the way. She's not useful anymore." Not useful anymore. I stood frozen in the hallway, holding a basket of clean towels like it was a shield. I didn't cry, not then. I just stood there, my heart thudding in my ears, hearing the truth they didn't think I could hear. You know, if you're reading this and you're thinking, how does a mother go from raising a child to being invisible in his home? You're not alone. Maybe you've been there too. Maybe you are there right now. If that hits something inside you, you're not crazy, you're not weak, and you're certainly not done. Back in my room that night, I folded each towel slowly and stacked them neatly on the bed. I looked around the guest room. Beige walls, No photos, no scent of salt air or frying fish, not a single piece of me left, not in this house, not in them, and for the first time in my life, I understood what it meant to be unwanted, not in words, but in silence. I came downstairs one morning and saw 3 boxes stacked neatly by the coat rack. One had my name scribbled on it, Mom, Missy. Inside, my yarn, my reading glasses, a few old cookbooks, and the quilt I always kept folded at the foot of my bed. The second box had my tea tins. The third had Cal's flannel jacket, the one that still smelled faintly like smoke and sea salt. At first I thought maybe they were organizing, spring cleaning maybe, but then I noticed the little yellow post-it stuck to the side. Guest closet, cleared. I stood there for a full minute, not sure whether to laugh or cry. I didn't do either. That night, I waited until after dinner to ask Brian. I saw my things in boxes, I said, careful not to sound confrontational. He didn't look up from his phone. Oh yeah, we're just trying to tidy up. Tessa wanted to use that space for storage. That space. My space. Then came the kicker. A few days later, Brian sat me down at the kitchen table with a folder and a too bright smile. We've been thinking, Mom, there's this place. It's beautiful. Has nurses, activities, a little garden, everything you'd love. I blinked. You want me to move? He didn't flinch. We're just looking out for you. It's not sustainable for you to stay here long term. Sustainable. Like I was a budget problem. Like I was expensive. It got worse. That same week, I went to the bank to transfer a little money, a few $100s to buy warm clothes for the fall. The teller pulled up my account and frowned. I'm sorry, Ms. Whitmore. There's a power of attorney on this account. You'll need your son's approval for withdrawals above $100. I couldn't breathe. I never signed anything like that. Apparently, Brian had added the clause months ago, said I was forgetting things. I stood there in that bank lobby, holding my breath, holding in the scream that wanted to rise. He had taken my money, my name, my independence. They hadn't just packed my belongings, they had boxed me up as a problem, a liability, a weight they no longer wanted to carry, and they thought I wouldn't notice. They thought I'd just go quietly. But that's the thing about mothers like me. We don't always scream when we're hurt. Sometimes we just wait for the tide to turn. It was nearly 2 a.m. when I slipped out of bed. I couldn't sleep. Again. The house was dark and quiet, but not the peaceful kind of quiet. The heavy kind. The kind that wraps around your chest and makes it hard to breathe. I opened the bottom drawer of the nightstand. Inside was an old zippered pouch I hadn't touched in years. My recipe book was in there. Soft leather cover fraying at the edges, along with 2 birthday cards from Cal and a letter he wrote me the year our bait shop finally broke even. I unfolded it carefully. If I ever go before you, it said, don't you let this world make you feel small. You've run this life better than I ever could. You could run the ocean if you had to. I sat there for a long time holding that letter. My hands didn't shake. My heart did. The next morning, while the house was still asleep, I walked to the garage. My old boots were there, dusty but not ruined. My flannel coat, too. I found Cal's old tackle box and slipped the recipe book inside. I didn't write a note, didn't pack much, didn't cry. By sunrise, I was in a cab headed south. I told the driver, take me as far as the bay. I'll walk the rest. And I did. My legs ached with every step down the rocky path. But I kept going, past the weeds, past the old crab traps, until I saw it. The bait shop, still there, sagging, sun-bleached, the sign barely hanging by one nail, but still there. I stood in front of it for a moment, my hand resting on the rusted door handle. I could hear the gulls overhead, the soft lap of tide water just beyond the rocks, the creak of the old dock boards. It wasn't much, but it was mine. And that was enough. Because for the first time in months, maybe years, I felt like someone again. Not someone's mother. Not someone's burden. Just Elaine, You know, we spend so much of our lives trying to belong somewhere, but sometimes the place that belongs to you has been waiting quietly all along. I stepped inside, dropped my bag, and whispered to the dust, "We're not done yet." And that's when it began. Not the escape, not the revenge, but the return to myself. The first morning back at the bait shop, I found a dead crab in the sink and a spider the size of a silver dollar under the counter. I didn't scream, I didn't run. I rolled up my sleeves, opened every window, and let the salt air in. The shop smelled like mildew and old memories, but there was still coffee in the tin and the propane stove worked after 2 clicks. That afternoon, I swept the entire place top to bottom, lit a fire in the old barrel heater, and made tea. Not for anyone else, just for me. It was strange how the body remembers what the heart forgets. My hands moved through the motions like I'd never left, gutting fish, slicing bait, tying knots. But this time, I wasn't serving anyone's schedule. I wasn't fixing dinner to please a house full of judgment. I was simply living. And quietly, I began to rebuild. I walked into town with a scarf wrapped around my neck and a purpose in my step. I opened a new bank account, in my name only. I visited the courthouse and filed for full reinstatement of my financial rights. No more power of attorney, no more protection. Then, I did something I never imagined I'd do. I rewrote my will. I sat in the tiny back room of the local lawyer's office and told him, plain and steady, everything I own, the shop, the savings, even the recipes, I want it to go to a fund for women like me, women who gave too much and got nothing back. He paused, pen in hand. "Are you sure, ma'am? No family at all?" I smiled. Family is who remembers your worth when you forget it yourself. Back at the shop, I hung a simple sign in the window. Hot tea, fresh bait, warm fire. Come in if you're cold or tired. And people did. Old fishermen, a widowed librarian, a young woman from 2 towns over who just needed someone to listen. I didn't need headlines. I didn't want applause. But every cup of tea I poured, every story I heard, every quiet thank you that passed across the counter, it stitched me back together. Not loudly, not quickly, just enough. Enough to know I wasn't lost, enough to know I wasn't gone, enough to know I was never the one who needed saving. Spring rolled in soft that year, the kind of spring where the wind still had bite, but the sun stayed a little longer in the sky, like even the daylight wanted to watch me begin again. The bait shop was steady now. I had regulars. A few old-timers came by just for the company. One woman, Marlene, sat every Wednesday afternoon with her knitting and told me stories about her late husband's bad jokes. Sometimes we didn't talk at all. We didn't have to. Then one afternoon I heard gravel crunch outside. A car I knew. Too new, too clean for this part of town, pulled up slow. It was Brian. He stepped out like he didn't know whether to knock or turn back. I didn't move from behind the counter. He walked in, took off his sunglasses, and looked around like he was seeing something he'd forgotten. "Mom, this place, I didn't know you'd—" I cut him off gently. "You didn't ask." He stood there, fidgeting, eyes darting to the bait buckets, the jars of tea leaves, the hand-lettered sign over the stove. "I came to talk," he said. I nodded toward the bench by the wall. He sat, he apologized. Said the words slowly like they were heavy in his mouth. Said he never meant to hurt me, that he was just overwhelmed, that he thought he was doing what was best. I listened, really listened, but I didn't offer comfort. When he asked, "So, what happens now?" I handed him an envelope. Inside was a copy of the legal deed to the shop, the new will, and a letter written in my own hand. "You said I couldn't survive alone, but I did, and I chose to leave everything I have to women like me. Women no one thought were still worth anything, not out of spite, but because I finally remembered my own worth." Brian didn't speak. He didn't have to. He stood slowly, folded the letter, and left. No yelling, no drama, just the sound of the bell over the door and the quiet that followed. And in that quiet, I felt free. Not because I won, but because I no longer needed to. If you've ever felt like your years of sacrifice were invisible, like the people you raised forgot who you are, then this story was for you. Tell me in the comments, have you ever had to reclaim your worth in silence? I'll be reading. And if no one else has said it today, you matter, still, always.